My family took us to dinner that night. Halfway through, my father stood up and loudly mocked my stutter. As I fought back tears, my mother sneered, "See? She can't even defend herself." The waiter whispered, "You don't deserve this," and slipped me a note that changed everything. I never thought I'd reach the point where I had to choose between my family and my own well-being. But here I am, looking back on that one dinner where everything shifted. My dad mocked my stutter in front of everyone at dinner. My mother, as usual, sided with him. I felt humiliated, helpless. Then, a stranger, our waiter, slipped me a note that changed everything. I don't know if I'm still processing the shock, but I finally realized I deserve better. I could really use some advice here on how to handle this situation going forward. It started as any other dinner invitation from my parents, a polite suggestion that we all get together, talk about life, catch up. They always had a way of making it sound like an obligation, and even after years of avoiding it, I found myself agreeing. They lived in the suburbs, in the same house where I grew up. A fancy Italian restaurant had opened near downtown, and my mom thought it was the perfect place for a family gathering. My husband, Nolan, was in the car with me, and although I could tell he was nervous about the whole thing, he kept his opinions to himself. Nolan knew how my family was, he had met them before, and he'd seen the cracks in our dynamic. My father, Raymond, had always been critical. Ever since I could remember, he expected more from me, even though I was doing just fine. And my mother, Margaret, was no better. She often acted like everything I did was just not enough. It was exhausting. But that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I wasn't prepared for what would happen. When we arrived, I could already feel the tension. It wasn't because of the place, though it was fancy, it was because the room felt thick with unspoken expectations. My father was sitting at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his face set in a way that made him look like he was ready for battle. My mother, dressed in something I was sure was far too expensive for a casual dinner, sat beside him, always poised, always in control of her emotions, or at least pretending to be. Kara, my younger sister, was sitting across from me, her eyes already avoiding mine, her nervous habit of playing with her napkin giving away the discomfort she, too, felt. It wasn't unusual for her to stay out of any conversation. She had always done that, just faded into the background. She had always been my mother's golden child, and I had been the odd one out. Nolan and I sat down, and we exchanged pleasantries. My father made a comment about the new menu at the restaurant, something about how overpriced it was. My mother, of course, didn't respond, she never responded unless it was to point something out about me or Kara. This time, however, it was me. "You know," she began, her voice sugar-coated but cutting, "I was talking to Sandra from church the other day. Her daughter, Ashley, got promoted to senior vice president at her firm." She glanced at Kara with that same scrutinizing look. "You must be so proud, Kara." Kara didn't even respond. I could see her pulling her shoulders in, trying to make herself small. But that didn't stop my mother from continuing, like a machine programmed to make everyone feel inadequate. "And what about you, Jessica?" my mom asked, turning to me with that forced smile. "Still working at that little design firm?" She raised an eyebrow. "I just don't understand why you didn't go for something bigger. Your degree could have gotten you anywhere, honey." I forced myself not to flinch. "Yeah, Mom, it's been going well," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. She wasn't done. "Well, I just don't understand the point of doing something if it isn't going to get you anywhere," she said, as if her words were pearls of wisdom. I could feel the tension rising in my chest. My heart started to race, my hands trembled slightly, but I fought to stay calm. I had worked so hard over the years to manage my stutter, to control it, to not let it define me. But in moments like this, when I was surrounded by their judgment, my anxiety often made it worse. "Dad, how's your work going?" I asked, attempting to redirect the conversation away from me. Raymond grunted, as though he had no interest in talking about anything that didn't concern him. "It's fine. You know how it is," he replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. I hated these dinners. My parents never seemed to care about my life unless they could use it as a way to compare me to others, to point out where I had fallen short. But I couldn't bring myself to leave. I didn't want to disappoint Nolan, and I didn't want to be seen as the daughter who couldn't hold herself together. As dinner progressed, I could feel my stutter creeping back in. The words I wanted to say wouldn't come out right. It had been years since I'd let it show, but tonight was different. The more my parents criticized me, the more my speech faltered. And then, it happened. Midway through the meal, my father stood up, his voice loud enough to carry across the table, drawing attention from nearby diners. He turned to look at me, and in a tone I could only describe as mocking, he said, "I mean, honestly, how do you even function like that?" At first, I didn't understand what he meant. But then, I saw his eyes twinkle with something cruel, and before I could stop him, he began mimicking me. That's, he exaggerated every word, turning it into something more than a simple comment, turning it into something humiliating. I froze. My stomach twisted in knots. The other diners looked over, some of them glancing awkwardly, unsure of how to react. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run out of there and never come back. But I was rooted to the spot. My mother, as usual, followed suit, her voice cold as she sneered at me. "See? She can't even defend herself. Can you believe that?" It felt like everything inside me shattered. I had fought so hard to be strong, to not let their words get to me. But in that moment, I felt like a child again. That child who could never meet their expectations, who could never be perfect in their eyes. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Nolan squeezed my hand under the table, his face a mixture of shock and anger. I knew he wanted to say something, do something, but he was just as frozen as I was. He wasn't part of this world, this toxic place where my parents could tear me down without even realizing it. That's when it happened. The waiter, who had been quietly serving food to the other tables, stopped by ours. He leaned down, his voice barely above a whisper, and said, "You don't deserve this." Then, without another word, he slipped me a small folded note. At first, I didn't even know how to react. I stared at the note in my hand, confused. The waiter's expression was kind, almost sympathetic, but he quickly moved away, continuing his work as if nothing had happened. I unfolded the note carefully, my heart pounding. "You are enough. Don't let them make you think otherwise. You are more than what they see." The words on the paper hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know who this person was, he was just a stranger, but his simple words were the validation I didn't know I needed. In that moment, I felt a spark of something deep inside me. Something that had been buried for so long. I wasn't just a reflection of my parents' judgment. I was my own person. I had value. I was enough. The room felt different now. My father was still laughing, still mocking me, but the sting of his words no longer had the same power. My mother's disapproval felt distant. The note had given me something they never had, strength. A reminder that I could stand up for myself, that I didn't have to let them control me anymore. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. The emotions were swirling too quickly. But when I stood up, it felt like I was walking on solid ground for the first time in years. I looked at Nolan, who had been watching me closely. "I'm done," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be, but firm. "I can't do this anymore." And with that, I walked out of the restaurant. My breath sharp in the chilly night air. Nolan followed quickly behind me, his steps echoing softly on the sidewalk. I didn't know where I was going, my legs carried me without thought. All I could think about was the note, the simple, kind words from a stranger who had seen what I couldn't. "You are enough." How could I have forgotten that? How had I let myself be reduced to nothing more than the expectations of people who didn't even see me anymore? Nolan caught up with me, his hand gently brushing my arm as we walked. "Jess," he said softly, his voice filled with concern. "Are you okay?" I didn't know how to answer that. "I don't know," I whispered. I just I never thought it would happen like that. He nodded, falling in step beside me. You don't deserve that, Jess. I can't believe they did that. I glanced up at him, my chest tight. I've never been able to make them proud, Nolan. No matter what I do, it's never enough for them. I'm not enough for them. His hand found mine, and he squeezed it gently. That's not true, he said, his voice steady, but with a firmness I hadn't heard before. You are enough. I see it every day. You don't need their approval to know that. But I wasn't sure I could just shake off everything they had said. Years of being told I wasn't good enough, years of being judged, of having every aspect of my life examined, weighed, criticized, had worn me down. I didn't feel like I was enough. Not even with Nolan's reassurance. Not with that waiter's note. As we walked, I could feel the weight of the evening's events settling on my shoulders. I wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and forget it all. But home, in the sense I knew it, no longer felt like a place of safety. My parents' house, with its perfect furniture and pristine walls, had never been a place where I could just breathe. I hadn't realized it until tonight, but the truth was, I had been holding my breath for years, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't even mine to begin with. We reached the car, and I slid into the passenger seat without a word. Nolan climbed in next to me, starting the engine. We didn't speak for a few moments, the quiet pressing in around us as we drove aimlessly through the streets. I couldn't get the image of my father's face out of my mind, the way he had stood up, so casually, and mocked me. I thought about how he used to do it when I was younger, teasing me about my stutter, about my lack of social skills, about how I couldn't be normal. And then my mother, always so poised, so calm in her cruelty, adding that biting comment. See? She can't even defend herself. I wanted to yell. I wanted to scream at them. To tell them everything they had ever done to me, how their words had stuck in my throat like poison for so long. I wanted to tell them that I wasn't that little girl anymore. That I wasn't the one who needed their approval to be happy. But I couldn't. I wasn't ready for that fight. Maybe I should go back, I murmured, more to myself than to Nolan. Maybe I should confront them. Tell them how much they've hurt me. Nolan glanced at me, his face a mixture of frustration and sympathy. I think you need time, Jess. Time to figure out what you really want to say. You don't owe them anything. I stared out the window, letting his words sink in. I knew he was right. But something in me still wanted to go back, to make them see what they had done, to make them understand how much their cruelty had shaped me. But what good would it do? They had never been willing to change, never been willing to see beyond their narrow view of who I was. And I had spent too long trying to be someone I wasn't just to earn their approval. The car ride felt endless, the quiet stretching between us, thick with unspoken thoughts. Eventually, we ended up at our apartment. Nolan parked in front of the building, and we sat in silence for a moment before I spoke again. I don't know what to do with all of this, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Nolan turned to face me, his eyes filled with understanding. I don't think anyone does, Jess. But you don't have to figure it out tonight. You've already done more than enough by standing up for yourself. You don't owe them anything. I nodded, but I didn't feel like I had truly stood up for myself, not yet. I had walked out of that restaurant, yes, but I hadn't confronted the hurt. I hadn't faced the real reason I had let their words affect me for so long. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest again, the old anxiety creeping back. What if I wasn't strong enough? What if I wasn't capable of being the person I wanted to be, without their judgment hanging over me? Maybe I need to see someone, I said, more to myself than to Nolan. He didn't respond right away, but his hand found mine again, his touch grounding me. If that's what you need, I'm here for you. I don't care what you decide. Just don't do it alone. I wasn't sure what I needed. I wasn't sure if therapy was the answer or if it was something else. But the note from the waiter kept running through my mind. You are enough. I didn't believe it yet, but maybe, just maybe, I was getting closer to believing it. I wasn't ready to forgive my parents. I wasn't ready to let them back into my life on their terms. But I was ready to stop letting their opinions dictate who I was. Nolan and I sat together in the car for a few more minutes, the weight of the evening still hanging in the air. Eventually, he squeezed my hand, and we both got out of the car. I wasn't sure what the next step was, but for the first time in a long time, I knew I had the power to choose it. And maybe that was enough for tonight. The days after that night were a blur. I avoided any contact with my parents, unsure of what I would say if I spoke to them again. Nolan was understanding, but even he couldn't help me figure out the complicated emotions I was dealing with. Part of me wanted to reach out, to try to fix the situation, to make them see me as something more than their disappointment. But the other part of me, the part that had been wounded for so long, knew I couldn't go back to that. One afternoon, as I was sitting in our living room, I found myself staring at the small note that the waiter had given me. I had kept it in my wallet, tucked into a compartment I rarely used. I pulled it out and reread the words, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. You are enough. I had been so afraid of confronting my family, of standing up to them, that I had ignored the most important truth: I was enough, whether they ever saw it or not. I wasn't defined by their approval. I was defined by my own actions, by how I treated myself, by the love I gave to those who truly cared for me. But what did that mean for my relationship with my parents? Could I just cut them out of my life? Would I be able to maintain any sense of peace if I did? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I had to stop allowing their toxic behavior to control my life. It was time to find my own path. It was time to heal. And for the first time, I was willing to give myself permission to do that. As the days stretched on, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me was still angry, hurt, and frustrated, but the other part of me, the part that had been buried under years of judgment and cruelty, was starting to feel something else: power. The power to choose, to walk away, to create my own boundaries. But still, there was a lingering question that gnawed at me. How could I stand up to my parents, the people who had shaped so much of my life and my choices, without making a scene or burning bridges I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of completely? I'd been avoiding them for a week after the dinner. My mother called, my father texted, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every time I thought about it, I felt that old anxiety creeping back in. But this time, instead of succumbing to it, I realized that I didn't have to answer to them anymore. I could choose to confront them on my terms, when I was ready, and not because I felt obligated to play their game. It was a Tuesday morning when I finally made my decision. I had spent the last few days reflecting, sitting with my emotions, and coming to terms with what had happened. I wasn't going to let them have the power anymore. It was time for me to take control. I called my mother. "Hi, Mom," I said when she picked up the phone. The sound of her voice made my stomach tighten, but I steeled myself. "Jessica, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you." "Your father is getting worried," she said, her tone steeped in concern but with a hint of annoyance. I could almost hear her tapping her nails on something, as she always did when she was impatient. "I know. I've been thinking," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I don't think we should continue pretending everything is fine. The dinner we had last week, it wasn't fine. It was hurtful, and I need to address that." There was a long pause on the other end. I could almost feel her processing what I'd said. The silence stretched on, but I didn't flinch. I was finally saying what needed to be said. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "That dinner was meant to be a nice family gathering. We were just talking." "You're being too sensitive, Jessica." "No, Mom," I said, cutting through her excuses. "It wasn't just a casual dinner. It was a demonstration of how little you respect me, how little you care about me as I am. You mocked my speech, and Dad, well, you both know how that felt. I've been living with that kind of behavior for years, and I can't do it anymore. I'm not going to keep pretending that I can just be okay with it." She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing through the phone, a faint hint of anger underneath the surface. I think you're overreacting, she finally said. You've always been so sensitive, Jess. Your father wasn't mocking you, he was just joking. Joking? I repeated, incredulous. Is that how you see it? What if I told you that your jokes aren't funny anymore? They never were. You've spent so many years telling me that I'm not good enough, not in your eyes. And I've spent just as many years trying to earn your approval, but I'm done with that. I've learned to accept myself, with or without your approval. There was another long pause. I could hear the shift in her tone as she tried to regain control of the conversation. I don't know why you're being like this. You've always been difficult to deal with, always making things harder than they need to be. I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. This was it. I had to say it. You know, Mom, for a long time, I thought it was me. I thought I was the problem. But I've realized something. You and Dad, I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in. You've never seen me. Not for who I really am. You've seen me as a project, as something you could fix, something you could mold. But I'm done. I'm not your project anymore. Her silence spoke volumes. I could hear the anger rising in her, but I wasn't backing down. Jessica, she began, her voice dangerously calm, I don't know what you think you're doing, but don't you dare try to make me feel guilty for being a mother. You haven't been a mother to me, I said firmly. You've been a critic. And I don't need that anymore. The words stung, but they were the truth. I was finally speaking the truth. I had spent years trying to make my mother proud, trying to get her to see me as more than a disappointment. But now I realized that I was not the problem. It wasn't me who needed to change. It was them. You know what? My mother said, her voice full of venom. I don't know how you can say that to me. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Fine. If that's how you feel, then I won't waste my time on you anymore. Maybe you should just stay away from us. I will, I said, my voice resolute. I'll stay away, because I've realized that my peace matters more than your approval. And I'm okay with that. I hung up before she could say anything more. For the first time in years, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. The next week, I received a letter from my father. He had written to me, trying to reach out, trying to justify his actions. The letter was full of the same old excuses, the same old claims that he didn't mean it that way, that he was just being honest, and that I needed to get over myself. But I wasn't interested in hearing any more of it. I was done. Instead of responding directly, I wrote my own letter. It wasn't a long one, but it was to the point. I told him that I didn't need his approval anymore, that I had spent too many years trying to earn it, and it had cost me more than I was willing to give. I told him that I was choosing my own path now, one that didn't involve constantly seeking validation from people who had never respected me for who I was. I mailed it without hesitation. A month later, I ran into Kara. She was at a coffee shop near my apartment, and I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked different, softer, more at peace. I didn't know what had changed, but she smiled warmly when she saw me. Hey, she said, sounding surprised but genuinely happy to see me. How are you? I smiled back, feeling a weight I didn't know I had been carrying begin to lift. I'm good, actually. Really good. She glanced down at her coffee cup before looking back at me. I heard about what happened with Mom and Dad. I know things have been tough between you all. I think maybe they're starting to understand, Jess. They've been talking about you more, asking about you. I was quiet for a moment, considering her words. I wasn't sure if my parents would ever change. But what I did know was that I had changed. And that was all I needed. I'm not going back, I said, my voice steady. But I'm okay with that now. I'm okay with where I am. I don't need them to understand anymore. Kara nodded, her expression softening. I get that. I think I've been trying to get their approval, too. But maybe it's time for all of us to just be ourselves, you know? I smiled, feeling a little lighter, and we talked for a while longer. It felt like the first real conversation I'd had with her in years, no pretenses, no expectations. Just two people learning how to live their own lives, free from the weight of a family that never truly saw them. As the months passed, I kept my distance from my parents. It wasn't out of cruelty, it was out of necessity. I couldn't go back to that old dynamic, that place where I was always the problem. But every now and then, I'd hear from Kara. She'd send me a message or give me a call, and I knew things were slowly shifting. They weren't perfect, and they never would be, but I had found my peace. And in the end, that was the best kind of revenge I could get. I had taken back control of my life, and nothing felt more satisfying than knowing I didn't need to live up to their standards anymore. I had my own. I was enough.